The letter of James doesn't say much about how we are saved, but it says a lot about what we should do after we are saved. In some ways, it is like a book of Proverbs for the New Testament. It gives us a series of things to do as we follow our Savior. In chapter 1, verse 22, James writes, "Do not merely listen to the word, and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." Or we might say today, don't just go to church and listen to the sermon. Put it into practice in your life. Then in verses 23 and 24, he gives an illustration. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror. And after looking at himself, he goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. Presumably, the mirror tells him he needs to do something, like get some smudge of dirt off his face, but he ignores what it says. It just rolls off like water off a duck's back. It's as if it never happened. Don't deceive yourself. Don't kid yourself. You are missing an important part of the picture. In verse 25, James states his point again. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they've heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. So we are to look at the law of freedom, the law of Christ, the standard of love, and it's supposed to make a difference in our lives. If we do what it says, we'll be blessed. Then James gives another illustration in verse 26. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. If people can't control their own words, if they are expressing evil thoughts, hatred, and lies, then, as Jesus said, it's not what goes into a person that makes them unclean, but the things that come out of their mouth. Those things can show that they're unclean on the inside. The small efforts they make toward being religious aren't doing them any good. Last, in verse 27, James says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." James is just naming a couple of categories here, groups of people who were often in distress in the ancient world. Widows and orphans were often in dire poverty, and both the Old Testament and the New Testament tells us that God cares for the poor, for the people who don't have anyone to support them. The point is not that orphans and widows are in a special category and we can ignore everyone else in distress. No, the point is that good religion is looking after anyone in distress. Orphans and widows are just two common examples. This is pure. It is not contaminated by trying to get a benefit out of it for ourselves. And it is faultless. God's not going to criticize it. You can't go wrong if you're doing the right thing. And he ends with, don't be polluted by the world. Now, there are all sorts of things that can pollute us, and James doesn't provide a list for us. But I'm sure one of the things that he would include on the list is being callous or uncaring about the orphans and widows, about the people in society who can't fend for themselves and who need a bit of help. That's the law that gives freedom. That's what happens when we take the teachings of Jesus and let him implement them, put them into practice in our lives.